Hi there, it's Llarold, and today I'm putting out my Vengeance Demon Hunter class guide for Shadowlands. If you have any questions, please leave a comment. I will be doing my best to respond to everyone who has questions about class changes, since they seem to be rolling in non-stop even as we are just so close to crossing the finish line. And while I'm at it, like and subscribe. Alright, let's get right to it. First question, same as always, why play Vengeance Demon Hunter? Same answer as usual, but better. They have a lot of health, a lot of self-healing, they do a lot of AoE damage. This is Demon Hunter's third expansion launch, and it looks like it's going to be their best start ever. The community is very excited for how well the class is playing in Mythic Plus, and while it has received several changes and nerfs within the last week and 24 hours, it's still really good. Honestly, the Spirit Bomb playstyle being legitimately viable again has me very excited. It's extremely fun, and I think the class designer did a great job with the talent reshuffle that actually opened up a couple of builds that are a lot more fun than the setups that VDH used in BFA. Alright, now on to that fun stuff, starting with Covenants. Kyrian is the #1 choice for Vengeance Demon Hunter in both Mythic Plus and Raids. Elysian Decree deals a ton of damage. It also generates 3 soul fragments, so it provides a decent chunk of self-healing as well. And you know, since you're using Spirit Bomb, it helps fuel more damage too. There's almost nothing negative I can say about this skill. It is a sigil, so there is the only downside. It has an activation time, and enemies can potentially leave the zone before it blows up. That's it though. This ability was relatively undertuned back when I did my Demon Hunter preview, or rather, it was correctly tuned to be competitive in AoE, while the Venthyr ability was tuned to clearly be the best in single target. In the course of tuning throughout the beta, they buffed the Kyrian ability by almost 300%, which is a lot, and the Venthyr ability by about 35%. Then they nerfed the Venthyr ability by like 40% and left Kyrian the same. So now Kyrian is just super strong. And I mean, I guess that's good. Kyrian still has the best signature skill for tanks, an extra health potion. Having access to another instant self-healing tool is a really good thing, and while some of the more important bleeds in Castle Nathria have been flagged as no longer being removed by this potion, it's still really nice to have another defensive tool coming from your signature skill to add into the rest of your kit. Beyond that, Kyrian has a decent soulbind in Pelagos. Even after the nerf to his versatility passive, he's an okay option just because he has the right conduit setup. 2 potency, 2 endurance. That's what you want. He grants an extra 10% mastery for 10 or so. Actually, I think it winds up being more like 19. But anyways, 10 plus seconds after using Elysian Decree. And while mastery is very nearly a worthless stat for Demon Hunters defensively, it's still a meaningful DPS gain that will be active when your Elysian Decree explodes. So it functions as not just a big burst damage skill, but also like a very minor pseudo DPS cooldown. That's okay. He also grants a baseline 3% magic damage reduction that's just up all the time, and that's, I mean, it's not a bad thing. Clea was very popular and heavily preferred over Pelagos, but her reactive healing bonus was nerfed into the ground, and her crit buff at the very bottom of the tree was also nerfed from 8% to 5%. I still think she's a competitive option, and a lot of players are planning to use her just due to the crit chance, but it's at the very bottom of the tree. You won't unlock that for like another 3 months. So I really don't think she's going to be a good choice until that point. In second place are the Night Fae, and their ability is the Hunt, which was redesigned very successfully since my preview video. I made fun of it a whole bunch, but I actually think it's pretty good now. It deals a very large burst of damage to the primary target and a decent chunk of damage to secondary targets as a dot. That dot can also hit the primary target, although sometimes it misses because it has an incredibly short range on it. Also, that dot damage was literally just reduced by 50% like 2 hours before I started writing this guide. Specifically, you have to cross directly inside of an enemy's hitbox for the secondary target dot to apply to it. So you basically need all of your enemies in a line or gripped up together. You can use Sigil of Chains to grip them, and that works pretty well, but there is the delay on Sigil of Chains, plus the cast time on the hunt, plus the travel time on the hunt, so it can be a little touchy to actually hit a full 5 targets with that dot. And then there are also times where you'll just use it in single target, it'll hit the target with the main hit and just not apply the dot. Had it happen plenty. Technically, it's capable of more single target DPS than Elysian Decree, but it's weaker for all-out AoE DPS, especially now with that nerf, and it's very unreliable. Even when it works correctly, it's, tougher to use. You have to line up mobs, account for the cast time, cast it, and dash into melee range. With Elysian Decree, you set it, it blows up, it gives you some souls and does damage, the end. It was also buffed, a couple hours ago, to grant a 50% leech buff on the primary target for 30 seconds. That tooltip isn't updated yet, but it's 50% now, which is an absolutely insane amount of leech. But given how bad Vengeance Demon Hunter single target damage is, and all tank single target damage, I guess except for Pally, it's still not really a huge amount of self-healing. More importantly, the thing is that VDH doesn't usually get in trouble because of a pure lack of self-healing. Although it is good to have, it's just usually you get killed from taking too much damage. Ultimately, this is kind of a weird combination of mobility and burst damage and self-healing, and while those are all good things, and I do like this skill, the way they're assembled is not clearly unambiguously good in the way that the Kyrian skill is. This feels very much like a PvP ability or a Havoc Demon Hunter ability, and then, oh hey, Vengeance also gets it too, and good luck with that. The Nightfae signature skill, Soul Shape, is a simple mobility skill. More mobility is always good, but not really necessary for Vengeance, and generally not as useful when we're talking about mobility skills, to me, as Door of Shadows. The best soulbind associated with the Nightfae is Naya, who grants you a stacking, non-refreshing mastery and max health buff when you cast the Hunt. Now, again, yeah, mastery is very, very bad. Very bad. But it's still a good source of extra AP, and the max health is great and very tanky. As far as I've been able to tell in testing, the buff applies once you finish casting the Hunt, but before you actually connect with the enemy and deal damage. So you do actually get the full benefit of that 8.5% more mastery. Ultimately, I don't think she's a great soulbind overall for Vengeance Demon Hunter. She's okay, but in my mind, not on the level of even Pelagos or either of the Venthyr soulbinds, due to the fact that, like Pelagos, she gives you mastery, but unlike Pelagos, she forces you through a finesse conduit. Burrs down in the bottom tier below the endurance conduit has just been hotfixed to apply to bosses, so it may be worth taking instead of a second potency conduit. Probably yes in single target, probably no in AoE. Venthyr is my personal favorite option for Demon Hunters, although it's not the best in any situation, so I'm not gonna play it. I think it's a little unforgivable, to be honest, that Sinful Brand, a single target dot, has a lower AP coefficient than Elysian Decree and AoE Sigil, and they share the same cooldown. I couldn't believe my eyes, but look, here they are side by side. Sigil is 358% AP, Brand is 338% AP. All right, so I'm cutting back in here to say, I had a great big rant here, but a change happened. Apparently, Sinful Brand has received an undocumented buff, and it now deals about 0.5% more damage than Elysian Decree. Literally 21 damage more per cast on a pre-made character who's wearing leveling gear. That still makes it bad, no question. But basically, it's about the same damage in single target until you include the DPS of the souls that Elysian Decree creates, or the conduits, or Legendaries, and even then, you know, Venthyr is still weaker. In single target, the only thing it does. The ability to use Metamorphosis to spread this to AoE packs is like the one redeeming feature of Sinful Brand, and it really does help its value a lot in AoE, but meta's a 3-minute cooldown, and that's not good enough to make it even remotely competitive with Kyrian under any circumstances. Now, if any literally last-minute buffs or nerf come along and shift the balance of these two covenants, I think Venthyr could still be worth taking. It's a big single target damage increase, and it does turn meta into a big AoE damage cooldown. It's simple, but it's okay. The defensive component is very, very forgettable. It may seem like a lot, but basically that just reduces the enemy's auto attack count by 1 during the debuff. So that's effectively 1 auto attack dodged per minute. It's not literally worthless, but isn't it? The signature skill for Venthyr is Door of Shadows, which is basically just a teleport with a cast time. You can use it to skip past trash packs or blink through boss mechanics, and that's pretty cool, but otherwise the extra mobility isn't a huge deal. The best soulbind for Venthyr is, I would argue, Nausea the Mistblade. She offers a really nice haste buff, as well as a 20% buff to your food, flask, and weapon enchant effects, but her conduit setup is not ideal, as it is 1 potency, 2 endurance, and 1 finesse. You can drop the second endurance conduit for a potency conduit, but that forces you into a pretty awful passive bonus that reduces the duration of roots and interrupts on you by 25%. General Draven is a very good alternative, although you don't unlock him for quite a while into the expansion. He's a lot more defensive and grants a passive damage reduction bonus while you're below 40% health, along with a stamina and self-healing increase as a reward for standing still for 4 seconds. He's a very tank-oriented soulbind that lets you easily pick up 2 potency conduits and either 2 endurance or 1 endurance and 1 finesse. Necrolords are the worst place option, or at least they were. They literally just got redesigned again within a couple hours of me starting to work on this. The tooltip isn't even updated on Wowhead yet. So here's how Fodder to the Flame works now. You use it, a demon spawns and fights you for the next 25 seconds. It takes massively increased damage from Throglaive, like literally half its health from a single hit. The demon deals a non-trivial amount of damage, but since you can kill it in like 3 or 4 seconds, that's not really an issue at all anymore. Once it does, it drops an Empowered Demon Soul, and picking up the Empowered Demon Soul gives you a really strong buff for 20 seconds, 30% more damage, and 15% damage reduction. This fixes basically every problem that every previous version of this ability had. You're no longer forced to tank enemies in some small AoE circle to reduce the damage they deal to you. It's not a debuff on enemies, so it will work against environmental damage, and it's a really good all-around effect now. They also fixed the bug that the last couple of versions of this skill had, where if you consumed the Empowered Demon Soul with Spirit Bomb or Soul Cleave, it wouldn't do anything. It works just fine now whether you walk over it or consume it with a skill. And yet I still have it ranked 4th. Why? Well, it's a 20-second buff on a 2-minute cooldown, it doesn't really have any synergy with the rest of the toolkit, and it just can't compete offensively with Elysian Decree. It is a decent little defensive cooldown, although 15% damage reduction is kind of on the low side. Still, it's really not bad anymore. It just doesn't synergize with the rest of the kit in any sort of meaningful way like Elysian Decree does, and it's not like Vengeance Demon Hunters have some big offensive cooldowns to pop once they get a big 30% damage buff anyways. There's no way to turn this thing into a huge burst damage window, whereas Elysian Decree is the big offensive cooldown that you want to use during that massive damage increase window. I like it a lot more now. It may wind up being better than I think it is, but I just don't see a way where it can compete with Kyrian, at least as everything is tuned right now. The Necrolord signature skill is also pretty underwhelming. It basically lets you channel up a shield before a boss pull or in between trash packs and Mythic Plus. Starting off combat with a decent sized shield is good, but it gets chewed up pretty quickly, so it's not like it's a major defensive gain. It's not as useful as the reactive self-heal that the Kyrian Potion provides, and you really shouldn't ever use it while you're actively tanking. Because channeling the shield prevents you from parrying or dodging, you're going to wind up taking more damage than you would have prevented. And finally, Necrolord Soulbinds for Vengeance Demon Hunters are also not that great. Bonesmith Hermir is arguably the strongest just due to the reflective damage of serrated Spalders. It adds up to a lot of damage, but it forces you away from a second potency conduit, and that's not terrific. Alright, so the quick summary on Covenants for Demon Hunters is that Kyrian is the best for everything. Vinther is fun enough and not bad to single target, but it's way behind in AoE. Night Fae has potential to be the best pure single target damage, but it's clumsy and a little buggy, and that kinda holds it back. Necrolord is also very interesting, but probably still the weakest option. Ultimately, nothing competes with Kyrian. Alright, I've talked about Soulbinds and pointed out the best trees, but now let's quickly cover Conduits, which fit into those empty sockets in the Soulbind trees. There are three kinds of Conduits: Potency increase your damage, Endurance increase your defenses, and Finesse or Utility. So let's break them down quickly. Growing Inferno is the better of the two generic Conduits available to all Vengeance Demon Hunters. It's a pretty decent increase to Immolation Aura's damage, and it's pretty good. It's a steady, reliable source of more AoE damage, although it's arguably weaker than any of the Covenant potency conduits. Soul Furnace is the other generic conduit available to Vengeance Demon Hunters, and it is extremely weak. Soul Cleave is pretty much a glorified auto attack. It hits for, like, seriously, about 2 main hand white hits. It's just not a good skill, and slightly increasing its damage every now and then isn't a good bonus. The Kyrian potency conduit is Repeat Decree, and it's extremely good. It's more damage from your hardest hitting skill. It doesn't spawn any extra soul fragments, but that's okay. It's extra damage, and extra damage don't hurt. Well, it does, but anyway. Increased Scrutiny is the Vinther potency conduit. It grants a modest amount of cooldown reduction on Sinful Brand. It's absolutely worth taking first, and it is a decent DPS increase at higher ranks, but a little underwhelming when you compare it to the Kyrian conduit. Unnatural Malice is the Night Fae potency conduit. It's literally the exact same effect as the Kyrian conduit, except it doesn't scale into AoE. And the effect is worth less DPS in single target, so it's just worse. It's still good if you go Night Fae. It's good, it's just not as good as the Kyrian one. And lastly, Brooding Pool is the Necrolord potency conduit, which is hilarious to me because there's no pool anymore. It buffs the duration of the empowered demon soul, and it is not scaling correctly. Initially, when they put this conduit system together, they had a lot of bonuses like this, which started out at a basically worthless 1-second buff at rank 1 and scaled all the way up to a really powerful 15-second buff at rank 15. What they realized from player feedback is that the kind of a design that goes like that's not fun or good. A 1500% increase in power as you level up the conduit, that's too much. So all the conduits were streamlined to fit a scaling system that works more like this. Rank 1 gives you a 25% increase? Okay, rank 15 will give you a 50% increase, or maybe 75%. That way you get the sense of growing power, you double or triple in strength over the course of a couple of raid tiers, but you don't feel like the first 5 or 10 ranks are almost meaningless. Unfortunately, they seem to be rushing to get this in at the last minute and completely forgot about this design, and so here we are. Anyways, it's really pretty good at higher ranks and really pretty bad at lower ones. It doesn't really fix the problems with Necrolord DH, but it does make the defensive component uptime way better, and that's pretty appealing. Alright, endurance conduits are thankfully a little easier to go over. Shattered Restoration is the best endurance conduit available to Vengeance Demon Hunters by a huge margin. It's a constant increase to your self-healing, and that's good. Always use this conduit. Viscous ink turns your already good magic damage reduction up another notch. It's not as mandatory, so if you only get one endurance conduit, don't worry about losing this one. That being said, if you can't get two, this would be the default pick. The non-default pick is Fell Defender. At lower ranks and using the normal build, this conduit isn't really anything special. If you switch to the max defense Fiery Brand talent setup, which I'll go over when we get to talents, then this becomes a terrific bonus that really helps boost your Fiery Brand uptime in a big way. The other two conduits, not worth mentioning. And finally, Finesse Conduits. Fellfire Haste adds a little bit more mobility onto your main mobility skill. It's a really minor bonus, so I would go out of your way to not take Finesse Conduits whenever you can, but if you have to, this is the default pick. Ravenous Consumption is the only other Finesse Conduit worth mentioning, and I think it's generally going to be useless in PvE. It seems like a pure PvP conduit, but maybe there's a situation in which you absolutely need to dispel not one, but two buffs at the same time. There you go. The other two Finesse Conduits are not worth using. Okay, next up is Legendaries, and there are just a few pieces to talk about here. First is Razalik's Defilement. To be honest, I'm not really a huge fan, but it is clearly the best option for dealing damage, and even after the nerf to its interaction with Elysian Decree, it's really still pretty good. If you aren't Kyrian, or even if you are really, it's also a good choice for utility purposes. Getting Sigil of Chains or Sigil of Silence back off of cooldown, significantly quicker is almost always a good thing. The defensive legendary option is Fiery Soul, and as you can see, it reduces the cooldown of Fiery Brand pretty significantly and enables the entire Fiery Brand playstyle. It sacrifices a ton of damage and is really only useful, at least in my eyes, for really high level Mythic Plus pushing. I don't think that you would need this for progression rating even. I think the overwhelming majority of the player base basically won't have a use for this legendary or for the Fiery Brand build, but I want to be thorough. Next up are two slightly more niche options, and I don't know if either of them ever really needs to be used or made, but some players have at least pointed them out as having some appeal. The first is Dark Glare Boon, which I really liked back when I did the Demon Hunter preview. Increasing Fell Devastation's cooldown by 15 seconds and lowering Demonic's duration by 2 seconds really cut into this legendary's value, and I don't really think it's worth using anymore. But if they ever let players wear two legendaries at once, like in patch 9.1 for example, this might be a good option to wear as a second legendary at that point. Second, and this is purely a random fallback DPS option that I think will only be useful if Elysian Decree gets massively nerfed, it's Judgment of the Arbiter. This is a random legendary available to all classes and specs, and all it does is proc damage. It does more if other players in your area are also running it, so it requires some coordination with other players to be competitive, and it's worthless defensively, but hey, there you go. It has a real slim chance of ever being useful, but maybe it's there if you want something to just literally do some damage and nothing else. All right, that's all the new Shadowlands class feature stuff. Let's move on to talents. This is a setup I would run for leveling, Mythic Plus, rating, and basically everything except for extremely hard-hitting content like super high Mythic Plus pushing. Vengeance Demon Hunter doesn't really have a lot of swappable talents. Some people complain about that lack of flexibility, and I get it, but I just think about it like, I guess I'll save gold on tomes. So, like, the only talent swap I would consider in this entire setup is dropping Sigil of Chains for quickened sigils if you're Kyrian, since the cooldown reduction is a DPS increase with Elysian Decree, and the faster activation time is good for ensuring enemies don't run out before it goes off. Still, I would rather have the utility of Sigil of Chains most of the time. Alright, now here's the Fiery Brand build, which I'm proud to say I saw this being useful way back in the Demon Hunter preview video, and hey, what do you know? It's a little bit useful after all. Feels pretty good. To be honest, I don't really like playing this build very much. I absolutely concede that it has way higher uptime on Fiery Brand thanks to Agonizing Flames and Charred Flesh, synergizing nicely, and Burning Alive adds some nice target spreading, but ultimately I just think it's a pretty boring playstyle. And I think a huge part of the reason you want to play Demon Hunter is to deal AoE damage, tons of it, and a lot of self-healing. This sacrifices not really much self-healing, but a lot of AoE damage for a big defensive cooldown. If I'm going to play a tanky, low-damage tank, why not just switch to Monk? Maybe that's just me. I guess it is a lot more work to keep 2 characters ready than it is to just swap 3 talents, so I guess that's the reason. There's not a ton to say about the Vengeance Demon Hunter rotation. You want to use your major cooldowns as much as you can, and that mostly just means your Covenant ability and Fell Devastation. Unless you're saving Fiery Brand to mitigate something specific, you should use it often as well. And the same kind of goes for Metamorphosis too, but be sure you don't use it if you're going to need it in the next couple of minutes. Beyond that, the class is really just all about generating souls and consuming them with Spirit Bomb. You still use Soul Cleave with the Spirit Bomb playstyle, you just use it as a Fury Dump on occasion when you have no souls active. Now here's the rotation for the non-Spirit Bomb playstyle. It's really just all about generating souls and consuming them with Soul Cleave. Ugh. Anyway, that's about it. Nothing really changes with Covenants. You still want to use them pretty much on cooldown regardless of your build or your Covenant. And before I forget to mention it, Demon Spikes, it's very simple. It's the simplest active mitigation skill in the game. Just use it as often as you can while tanking. There's literally nothing else to manage, no resource or anything, just the cooldown. Just use it. The basic stat priority for Vengeance Demon Hunter is pretty much the same as it always has been. Haste is the most important stat. You want as much as you can get. Versatility is very good. It adds a lot of damage, healing, and constant damage reduction. It's a good, safe stat. Crit's good offensively, but less consistent defensively, and Mastery is very weak. It makes Demon Spikes a little stronger, which really doesn't do much at all. You're already incredibly tanky while Demon Spikes is active, even without any Mastery. It's just a really badly thought out stat and very weak. Ultimately, the important things to go after are sockets and item level, then haste, then versatility, then crit. Try not to get mastery when you can. In terms of notable pieces, the gear is pretty much mostly interchangeable. The only things that you really want to focus on in the early weeks of the expansion are getting amulet and rings that have haste on them and getting decent trinkets. Lightless Force on both of your weapons is the way to go for dealing damage. As far as damaging trinkets go, there are some decent ones from Dungeons and Raid. Pretty much all of the on-use ones are at least decent. The 2 best ones from Dungeons, as far as I know, are Phial of Putrefaction and Shadow Grasp Totem. The 2 best ones from Raid are Dreadfire Vessel from Sire Denathrius and Stone Legion Heraldry from the Stone Legion Generals. The Dark Moon decks this expansion aren't great. The DPS one lets you leech haste from your enemy for a 20-second haste buff on a 90-second cooldown. It's not bad, but not great. The tank one is also a 90-second cooldown, and it grants you a minor brief defensive cooldown that basically blocks part of the next 5 hits. It's also fairly underwhelming. Neither of them are bad if you have the gold and you want a quick trinket to get you going and, get you some quick item level, but neither of them are really all that great. So good that you couldn't live without them either. I guess I would recommend the DPS trinket if you have to choose, and because they're unique equipped, you do have to choose. Don't go buying 2 Dark Moon. Do not waste your gold on 2 Dark Moon cards. Yeah. We're all feeling pretty excited for Shadowlands. In the course of making this video, I've pretty much come to terms with the idea that I'm going to be playing Carrion on my Vengeance Demon Hunter, and honestly, I think I've reached the acceptance stage. I'm kind of happy about it now. Demon Hunter's poised to have probably their best start ever. It's really powerful, and they're finally not just going to be fun but kind of bad for once. I think they're actually really good. Well, I think that about covers it. If you have any questions about Vengeance Demon Hunters and Shadowlands, ask away. Stay tuned for more Shadowlands content, and thank you for watching. Bye.